I'm James Barbush of Linglestown, Pennsylvania. I want to tell you a story. Pretty interesting story about heritage. Heritage discovered. It's a little chilly out here in the woods behind my house. My wife, her name is Yvonne Martinez. Martinez, she's of Mexican descent by her father's side, and also German descent by her mother's side. Her mother's maiden name was Herdman. Her mother, Carol, at a very young age, who lived in Johnstown, married a young man by the name of Albert Martinez. This was back in the 50s. Albert Martinez. Albert and Carol were very happy. Albert was in the military. And the military took him away from home sometimes. And Albert and Carol had 3 children. Steve, the oldest son, Yvonne, the oldest daughter, and Elaine, the youngest daughter. At the age of 25, Albert was killed. Killed while in Michigan, I believe. And they never knew the circumstances of his death other than he was shot in the back. Now that was around 1963. So that would have been the time when Carol was pregnant with Elaine. Yvonne was just a year old, and Steve was probably a year and a half old. And after the death of Albert, Carol was left to raise the children on her own, which she did quite nicely. Well, when Albert is taken out of the picture and is no longer with the children never knew their father. They only had 1 or 2 pictures of him. They hardly knew what he looked like. Certainly didn't know what he sounded like. There are no movies of him, no home movies. Of course, back then they wouldn't have had sound anyway. But my wife Yvonne grew up all her life not knowing who her father was, not knowing who his relatives were, because when Albert passed away, the rest of his family seemingly paid no attention to Albert's wife and kids. So it stayed like that for decades. Now here's where it gets interesting. Steve Martinez became a Methodist minister only about within the last 5 years, or maybe a little more than that. He became a Methodist minister, and he went to Texas. And in Texas, he met someone who was also a Methodist minister by the name of Perla. And he discovered that Perla was his father's sister. After nearly 50 years of not knowing anything about their father and his family, Steve Martinez goes to Texas and meets Perla Martinez, the sister of Albert. Is that a coincidence? Nah, that's a God incidence. How could that happen? Well, recently, in late October of 2013, Wilbert Martinez passed away. Wilbert is a brother of Albert. Now, Wilbert lived in Johnstown, where the family was from, where Perla once lived 50 years ago. She left Johnstown. Never was back since. Well, Albert passed away. No, excuse me, Wilbert passed away. So Perla decides she's going to come to the funeral. And she does. And she connects with Steve, and Steve connects with us. And Perla comes to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, stays with us in our home. And then we go to Johnstown to the funeral. Now Perla, we never knew. We never met. Yvonne never met. Perla is her aunt. So for the first time, Yvonne meets Perla. And Perla had seen Yvonne as a baby and knew her as a baby back then. But in 1963, Perla left Johnstown and moved out west. She eventually married and had some children. But also coming back to Harrisburg and going back to Johnstown, Perla wanted to find her mother's grave. When Perla left around 1963, it was shortly after that her mother passed away. So when she left, she never saw her mother again. She was never back to Johnstown, never saw the grave, never knew where the grave was. So Perla and Yvonne and her sister Elaine went to the funeral in Johnstown, met some family there, and they came back to Harrisburg. And then a day later, Perla, Yvonne, and myself went to Johnstown. And before that, we discovered that Perla's mother, Yvonne's grandmother, Teresa Martinez, was buried in a cemetery called Oak Cemetery in Daisytown, just on the north side of Johnstown. Well, we went there to that cemetery, and we looked around and we looked around, and finally, Perla found the marker for Teresa Martinez. For the first time ever in Yvonne's life, and she's over 50, she got a connection with her ancestry, with her heritage. Teresa Martinez, who had 18 children. Yes, I said 18 children. Not all of them survived. Some died at birth, but many survived. And apparently they were scattered around the country. But now that we have a connection with Yvonne's Aunt Perla, the daughter of Teresa, and now we've seen the gravestone of Teresa Martinez, we've made a connection with our heritage. And now we know who the great-grandmother of my sons is. My sons are Nicholas and Joseph. Their great-grandmother, Teresa Martinez. And a whole host of aunts, great-aunts, and great-uncles. It's amazing how God leads us to places that He wants us to find. Leads us to our heritage, because our heritage means something. Our heritage is about our identity. It's about our past. It's part of the makeup of who we are and part of the makeup of where we are going. And there are clues in our heritage as to what our purpose is on this planet. Well, that's just a brief summary of how my wife, never knowing her father, after 50 years, finally made a connection with her Aunt Perla, her grandmother, Teresa Martinez, and a further connection with her father, Albert Martinez. So we thank God for that. So I have some video, which I will post, related to this gravesite that we found. So take a look and see what you think. God bless you.